ask that question because I'm sure a lot of people who are watching are thinking the same thing, are wondering the same thing. So I've actually had that existential question for many years now. Does she know? Does she not know? But I can tell you this. I went on to have other experiences personally and with the clients that I was working with what I call false light entities. These entities who are dark beings. There's a variety of kinds of them, of different dark beings who shapeshift into beings of light. And I can tell you that they are extremely convincing. They are so convincing that it is easy for me to see or imagine how a person, even a very discerning person, could be duped into thinking that, like, this particular healer believes or says that she believes that she's working with a council of angels. But the thing that attacked me was absolutely a jinn entity. It's a jinn. For those of you who don't know, that's spelled D-J-I-N-N or J-I-N-N. And they speak about this type of entity in the Quran, but it is not just an entity that lives in the Middle East. I've encountered these entities where I live now, where I used to live, and many clients as well. And they are masters of deception. So did she know? That's my answer.
Besides the jinn, what are some other false light entities that are out there?
Well, there's actually a long history of demons pretending to be angels and beings of light. But I've also seen what I'll just call dark spirits, dark souls, who are mischievous and they like to play around with people. So just to be really clear on my definition of that, I'm speaking of human souls who have passed away, people who've died, but they have not gone over to the afterlife. They are stuck on the earth plane, and they're a bit troubled or confused, or even the ones that are super dark that have really aligned with the dark agenda. Any of them on that spectrum, they will sometimes pretend to be beings of light, ascended masters, like any of these beings that I've just described will pretend to be beings of light, ascended masters, angels, even Jesus, Mary Magdalene, fairies, I mean, you name it. And for me, I'm actually able to discern what is authentic and what is false light. And I point this out because I've noticed that there are people who have discovered through maybe their own experiences with entities or through maybe just their gut instincts, they can sense this false light situation going on in the spiritual world, which it's so common right now, and they can sense that, but they then polarize into this belief that every single entity is a false light entity and they're all bad and they're all dangerous. And actually, I don't agree with that. I think there are authentic angels, there are authentic guides, there are authentic fairies, but there are also plenty of imposter entities out there.
So the big question is, how do we tell if we're talking to a real light energy or a dark one?
That is the ultimate question, and it's an important question. And we need to really be developing our discernment first and foremost. And there are absolutely some indicators that we can look for. And interestingly, some of these indicators of false light entities are taught in the New Age as being positive signs of high vibrational beings. And these are not positive signs. For example, I've heard spiritual teachers and I've seen information on social media talking about when you hear a high-pitched frequency, that's a sign of a high vibrational being. I absolutely used to believe that also, until I had numerous encounters with jinn and other types of false light entities, and how they would enter into my space. I would immediately hear a high-pitched frequency. And I noticed that this is a common calling card. And those who are clairaudient, who tend to pick up on spiritual information through either hearing sounds or words, pay attention. If you hear a high-pitched frequency, most of the time, that is an indicator that this is not something positive. And that's a belief that's so common in New Age. And we need to really be open to releasing some of the misinformation that's out there. So a second way that we can pinpoint that we might be dealing with a false light entity is that if that entity comes through in a really big way, like super loud or super bright, because genuine entities, like our genuine guides, tend to be more subtle. Their energy tends to be more gentle. One thing that you can really watch out for is that if you start to hear a booming, super loud voice in your head, if you start to get auditory messages that are loud and clear, that you're probably dealing with a jinn and not some other type of entity. Because again, the authentic entities usually come through in a more subtle way. And those who tend to pick up on spiritual information in a visual way, they might see the entity as a super bright light. It's almost as though that entity, the false imposter entity, is actually overcompensating and making itself really bright and shiny in order to draw in those who are authentic seekers of the light, are super drawn to either they can see the light or they can feel it. They can sense that there's a really strong light, and so they're drawn to it. And the false light entity does that on purpose, because people don't. So many people don't know that there are false light entities, and so they just feel drawn to this phenomenon. There's another way that you can identify a false light entity, and this is where the entity that you're working with, let's say it's a guide or an angel or somebody that you're working with as a spiritual ally, if their facade slips, and this actually happens a lot, someone is in meditation, they're in their mind's eye, or clairvoyantly, they're seeing an image of who they think is their guide, and for just a split instant, that being goes from looking like, ascended master so-and-so to all of a sudden in this split moment, there's just a second where that being looks like something different. It looks like something dark. And then the facade comes back online and it looks like the angel or the ascended master again. If that ever happens, then that's your 100% sure indicator that you're dealing with a false light entity. There's no questioning it. There's no giving it a second chance. You've got your answer right there. And similar to this, there's a phenomenon that I've actually noticed with a lot of people where they have had some kind of relationship with a spiritual being where at first it started off as something really scary that was attacking them. And they were either seeing a really scary being or hearing a spirit, an entity that was saying horrible things to them and trying to scare them and terrorize them. And then after a while, that entity turns into Archangel Michael, or it turns into, whoever, this like so-called beneficial being. And then the person thinks that, oh, now, well, I don't know what that was before, but now I'm working with Archangel Michael. And I've actually seen this a couple of times with professional psychics who they think that they have Archangel Michael working with them, but the original relationship that they had with this entity was that the entity was terrorizing them. And then later it reintroduced itself as Archangel Michael, that, oh, I'm not actually that, I'm actually this. And so the person, because they don't have enough information to understand what's really going on, they just kind of accept that that's how Archangel Michael wanted to present himself to them.
Why are these entities attacking people?
So I would change the wording and I would say maybe not attacking, but manipulating. The agenda is to manipulate really the human race. Okay. And right now, what I've been seeing actually since 2016 is this web of, and I call it the illusion matrix or the false light matrix, not to be confused with, what did you call it earlier?
Like a simulation?
Right. I'm not speaking of simulation theory. I am talking about a web of imposter entities that are hooked into a variety of people, from famous to not so famous spiritual leaders and teachers, other types of leaders in the world. But I've especially seen this in spiritual communities. And the web looks like this: a false light entity. And it's usually going to be a powerful false light entity, not just some random ghost, but a jinn or a demon, something that has a fair amount of power. And it's going to hook into this spiritual teacher here. And this entity's intention is to then be able to hook into all of this person's students and clients and following. And the false light entity wants the control. These entities are essentially psychopaths. They want to create confusion. They want to be worshipped. Actually, they love to be adored, which is one reason why they will pretend to be Jesus, Archangel Michael, or what have you, because they love that energy of adoration. They just eat it up, just like a psychopath, just like a psychopathic person has that huge ego and wants to be worshipped by whoever will worship them. So yes, sometimes there will be some level of attack that's involved, that's intended to manipulate, but most of the activity of false light entities does not involve attack at first. The intention is to convince the person that they actually are the ascended being. And so they will be all lovely and loving, and they'll be channeling all these really convincing messages to the person, to the teacher or the spiritual worker. And the attacks usually will only happen when the person realizes, ooh, something is not right, and they try to pull away from the entity. That's when the entity, the false light entity, will show its true colors. And that's when the person will typically come under attack. For me, I believe the reason why I was attacked in 2016, whereas a lot of her other followers weren't, for some reason, I was able, I don't know why I was originally attacked, why it started off as attack right from the get-go, but there was something about me that was able to see its true colors. I call myself an open-minded skeptic. I question everything, and something about my nature, I think that entity saw me as a threat. So the false light entity will absolutely attack someone that they feel is a threat. But if they feel that they can draw that person into their web, it will not usually be an attack. It will usually be all sorts of loveliness and false bliss.
What are some of the symptoms that a person may be experiencing when they're under psychic attack?
Here is one really important symptom, not just of psychic attack, but specifically that someone is dealing with a false light entity that is hooking into them. This is actually a concept that one of my past spiritual mentors originally introduced me to. She called it spiritual anesthetic. And this is when an imposter entity is hooking into a person. Let's say they're at a spiritual event where everybody is opening up their energy and they're calling in all of these beings, which in theory sounds like a wonderful event, right? But false light entities love those kinds of events. They just come flooding in. And one of the common indicators that a false light entity is hooking in is a feeling of bliss. Now, I've had people argue with me over this. They say, how could feeling good be a bad thing? So let me just distinguish a grounded, centered sense of peace. That's not what I'm speaking about here. That's a good thing. Grounded, centered, really anchored and feeling harmonious. That's a good thing. This ungrounded, blissed out, almost like you're on drugs. You're just like so blissed out and really kind of out of your body. You're just like out here. That is a sign that something false is trying to hook into you. And it's like, again, my mentor years ago called it spiritual anesthetic, because it's like this, it's kind of like when a tick hooks onto a human and it ejects this anesthetic. into the person's skin so that they won't know that they have a tick attached to them. And the tick can go on and just suck blood from the person and they have no idea. And it's the same thing. That entity fills the person with bliss, hooks in, and then it can feed off of that person's energy.
Is it possible that a person who thinks they're experiencing a Kundalini awakening is really being under a manipulation?
Oh, and that's such a cool question. I've never had anyone ask me that before. I would say absolutely yes. Now, I tend to not say that something is always going to be yes. I do believe that people can have an authentic, like an actual authentic Kundalini experience. I do think that's possible. But can someone have a Kundalini or some other type of really intense spiritual awakening experience, and it is not authentic? It is actually driven by entity interference. Absolutely. Yes. And that's where it can get really confusing because a person will have this experience, whether it's Kundalini or some other type of really profound awakening, and they go to their spiritual mentor, and their spiritual mentor says, well, that's a positive experience. You should welcome more of that. And really, in every single situation that we're having, we should be questioning everything. Always question.
How do we defend ourselves against these entities?
Okay, so if we're talking about false light entities, the way that you would defend yourself from them is to have the ultimate level of discernment developed within yourself. You want to avoid them from the start because it is a lot more difficult to disengage from a false light entity. Let's say if you've had one hooked into you for 20 years and you were working with it as your guide or your guardian angel or something like that, it is a lot harder to safely disengage. It is possible. I would recommend getting some professional help if you've been hooked into for that long. But really, we want to avoid them from the beginning. Now, there are some basic methods that can help us gain protection from all negative entities, whether they're false light, imposter beings, or just showing up as dark beings from the get-go. And I can give a couple of real easy tips right now if you'd like for me to.
Sure.
So before I go into giving these quick tips, it's really important to understand that whether you're trying to disengage from a false light relationship or you're under psychic attack by some obviously dark entity, usually those issues have taken time to develop. And so, yes, absolutely, some of these quick tips can help you get relief, but it's also really important to do the deeper work. And I can share some resources at the end where people can get some ideas on how to do the deeper work. So some of the quick tips. The first one is that if you suspect that you might be dealing with any kind of negative entity, negative energy, whether it's false light or not, doesn't matter, any kind of negative energy entity, or maybe you suspect that someone has sent a psychic attack, negative energy your way, they're mad at you, and you just have a feeling, and you don't even have to be sure. You can just have a feeling, like maybe there's something weird going on in my house, or I've been having a lot of nightmares, or there's just, it feels like there's something off. You can do this really easy technique that's much stronger than using sage or other dried herbs. And it's burning frankincense resin. And this is actually something that the Catholic Church used to do. They don't do it as much anymore, but they probably should still be doing it. The reason why we use frankincense resin is because it is a physical tool that is highly effective at clearing out all sorts of negative entities, from demons to evil spirits to you name it. And the cool thing about it is that you don't have to have any special abilities. You don't have to have developed your intuitive guidance like I was recommending before. You don't have to have gotten that done yet. You don't have to learn any special spells or any esoteric knowledge. You can just burn frankincense. Now, is that going to take care of a curse that's been following the last 3 generations of your family? No, it's not going to get to the root, but it's going to give you some relief. Now, I want to be really clear. I'm not talking about the incense sticks that you can buy at the store that are probably scented with synthetic fragrance. We want to be using actual frankincense resin. And it is like little pellets that are dried sap. It's dried tree sap. So there's another really easy tool that you can use if you would like to initiate extra protection or if you feel like you're under attack. So you can use salt, like just regular table salt. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, or you can use sea salt. You can use the fancy stuff. And again, you don't even have to feel like you're under attack in order to use this as a tool. You can just simply use it as a preventative to keep anything at bay that might have happened in the future. One easy way to use salt is to lift up your pillow in your bed and just pour some salt under your pillow. Some people have the majority of their unwanted paranormal issues at night while they're sleeping. And this is such an easy tool. And salt actually does this amazing thing. It tends to diminish the power of the entity's life force energy. And so it tends to have trouble passing over or passing through that. And I've actually known people who, when they were having major paranormal issues, they actually poured salt all inside their bed, so they were sleeping on it. It feels weird to sleep on salt, but sometimes we need to do things like that. Other people will create like a ring of salt around their bed, a circle of salt. You can also take the cardboard cylinder of salt and just pour that in a line across the threshold of your front door, your back door, anywhere people can come and go. And this is a really easy way to make it so that anyone who comes into your house, if they have an entity attachment, a lot of times the entity attachment will be left at the door. And then when the person leaves, they'll pick it back up again. But the entity won't be coming into your house. So it's such a simple, easy thing that you can do. And it's really helpful and it's inexpensive.
How can we take the tips that you've given us and any other information that you have and become more empowered with it?
Well, I love that question. So I think the biggest way that we can become empowered moving forward, now that you've heard what you've heard in this podcast, is to take this information, take it in, and instead of keeping our heads in the sand and just hoping that nothing negative will come along, just hoping that everything's going to be okay, looking at empowerment in a new way. Instead of avoiding anything that makes us uncomfortable, empowerment is gaining the information, the vital information, so that we can move forward knowing what's out there, how to identify it. And when you know what's out there, when you know how to identify what's going on, then you are in a much more powerful place. You can make those informed decisions and you can nip issues in the bud before they have the opportunity to turn into anything more serious. So for example, with the information about false light entities, knowing what you know now, when you go into meditations, or when you are trying to work with a guide, or you go to a spiritual event, you have this new information. And with this new information, you learn to listen to your inner guidance. Does something feel off? Am I uncomfortable right now? Does it feel like something might not be what it seems to be? And you can choose to listen to your inner guidance, maybe leave the event if you feel that the people running it are not bringing in the best energies. You can leave. You can end your meditation time, or you can speak up and be clear about what kinds of entities or energies are allowed into your space. Once you have information and you follow your inner guidance, then you can begin to set those clearer boundaries. And here's one really important thing about any kinds of negative entities out there. They want you to think that you are not powerful. You are actually more powerful than they are. So if you can get informed and begin to really set boundaries just like you do in your interpersonal relationships, learn how to set boundaries in your spiritual relationships as well. You are the boss of your energy field. Some entity, even a valid spirit guide, is not your boss. You are the boss of your energy field. You get to decide which guides you'll work with. You get to decide who's allowed in your energy field and who's not. And that is true empowerment, knowing that you get to set the boundaries, you get to set the parameters, and you are much more powerful than perhaps you believed before.
So are you saying that we are more powerful than all of the entities that may be attacking us?
Well, there actually are some entities in existence that are on the powerful end of the spectrum. But there are way more entities out there that are pretending to be way more powerful than they actually are. And it's a mind game. It's what I call psychological psychic attack, where they are trying to use methods of manipulation to scare you, to make you think that they are this big scary monster and you are powerless, when 9 times out of 10, they actually have very little power, which is why they're using mainly psychological methods to try to manipulate and scare. If they were actually very powerful, they would not be using that approach. So these entities that are really manipulative and trying to sneak in and pretend to be other things, pretending to be spirit guides, etc., most of those are actually very low on the power totem pole. They don't have very much power. And we actually have more power than they do. And we just need to remember that.
Maya, you've written a couple books. What are the titles and what are they about?
My first book is called Darkness Disguised as Light, The Hidden Truth About Psychic Protection and the Illusion Matrix. That's a big mouthful, but you can look up Darkness Disguised as Light by Maya Zahira. That book is a combination of the story of my psychic attack in 2016. There are a whole lot more details that we didn't get into today.